Welcome back. Today I want to take a quick look at the HUD. So we're going to be doing a lot of UI stuff coming up here. We're going to be doing inventory UI. We're going to be doing party UI. We'll be doing some NPC dialogue UI. We might even do some vendor UI and a few other areas as well. You know, things like a spot to show buffs and debuffs, things like that. And a lot of this UI needs to be dynamic. And as I learned from trying to do the skill tree in UMG, UMG is not the best solution for dynamic content. And I'll show you why. So I got a few notes here. So first let's talk about the anatomy of a game. And this actually applies to not just games, but nearly every Windows app that you have follows this same structure, right? At its lowest level, this is what it does. Even Windows itself follows this with WinMain and WinProc. So you collect some input, you update some state, and you render the state. This is how most all visual programs work, including games. And so the problem that I have with UMG is this idea of duplicate data. So I'll give you an example. Your character has an array of inventory items that character has. Let's say they have a bag, and they got some items in the bag, and you've got an array of those items. If you were to try to build an inventory system in UMG, you have to add these other UI elements, could be icons, to some kind of grid widget, right? And this is, in a way, like a second array. And so what ends up happening is you have this extra piece of duplicate data that you have to keep in sync. This isn't easy. It goes against all of the fundamental ideas of programming where you'd like to keep your data in one place and only have to worry about one thing. One of the things that HUD allows us to do is that we can just render the data we already have. We don't have to make copies of it. We don't have to worry about keeping it in sync by adding and removing. Removing is often where the issue comes in with UMG. And so we can just render it as it is, and if it changes, our render changes. So one of the things about the HUD, and you may not realize that UMG is actually doing this as well, but the HUD renders every frame. Technically, UMG does as well. It's rendering every frame. It's just you don't have control in UMG of how it renders every frame. In HUD, you do. Whatever you render one frame, if you don't re-render it the next frame, it disappears. So it's very simple. It auto corrects itself because if anything changes, the next frame renders differently. And so that's why we're going to be using it for our UI system. I actually looked it up because I was wondering when I started with UE4, there was no UMG. And so I looked it up before this, and UMG was added in 4.4 in preview, and then it looks like it went to full release in 4.5. So initially, we didn't even have UMG. It was all HUD. So let's take a look at HUD a bit closer. So our world settings over here for our game mode is going to tell us what our HUD class is, and we've already got one set up because we used it for the floating text. So we're going to go find our HUD class here. Oh, just to point out, this is not our game project. This is a copy I made. We won't be making any changes to the project. So everything I do here is just being done in a copy because we're just looking at some things and some ideas. So if you're trying to follow along with the Let's Make an MMO in UE4 tutorial, nothing that happens in this video are changes that you want to make to your project because I'll be deleting this copy of the project as soon as the video's done. Okay, so we come in here and we've got our begin play where we get a reference owning player character. And the reason we do this here is that interestingly, this event receive draw HUD actually starts running before the begin play is done. So like here in this case, we're using it to draw the XP. If we didn't have this check to see if the reference is any good, this would throw a null reference because this starts probably at the same time the begin play starts, meaning it started being called every frame before this gets set. So what we're going to do right now is we're just going to going to disconnect this stuff. I'm going to leave that check there. It's actually not needed for what we're going to play with today, but I'm going to move this down. And yeah, hook that back up. So what we've got here is we've got this event receive draw HUD. It's like tick, but it's actually special. So if you try to put some of these draw BP nodes in event tick, they'll either not work, or I think they're actually smart enough to tell you, hey, you can only do those things in the receive draw. But this is our on draw, and this is basically going to get called once per frame, and it's sending us our screen XY size that we're drawing on, which is cool. So we're going to look at a few things that we can do. So we've got draw texture. Okay, so we can draw a texture. In this case, a texture is often a image, a UI image. So that's one tool we've got. That's going to be really useful. We're going to use that a lot. We can also draw text. Don't use this painting one here. Use the one under HUD. So we can draw text. Well, that's pretty cool. We can pick a font. So we've already dealt with fonts earlier. And we can position it where it is, change the color, change the text. That's pretty cool. We also, and this one could be really powerful, we can draw materials, right? So if you've done stuff with materials, there's some pretty awesome stuff that you can do in your shaders and your materials. You know, animate things, cool effects, lots of really neat stuff you can do. So sometimes you may want to render a material instead of a texture, as the material would be an easy way for you to get some cool, you know, looks. I'll give you an example. A material may be a great spot to, you know, do some kind of like, you know, cool down on a button, you know, where it's, you know, maybe doing some kind of, you know, radial thing on a cooldown, or maybe it's a wipe from top to bottom, or there's a lot of effects you could do. You know, you did a lot of things in materials are cool. Materials are awesome, and they run on the GPU. So those are kind of your basic output, right? If we can draw an image, we can draw text, we can draw a material. What else do you need to do? Nothing else you need to do. And then for our input, we've got the events here. So we've got hitbox clicked. We'll have to look at that in a second, what that does. And we've got hitbox begin cursor over. Okay, that seems useful. And we've got hitbox end cursor over. Okay, cool. So we can tell when we click something. It's got this box name. We can tell when our cursor went over something and when our cursor left something. So those are some powerful events per input. That's not getting any of our key events, but we can do that in the player controller. But for a lot of our UI is going to be mouse-based, and so we could definitely use those. So let's try something here real quick. Let's just do something simple. So I'm going to grab a texture. We're going to make a button, you know, just something simple here. We're going to use our parchment here, and let's put it at like 200, 200. A lot of times these are going to be dynamic, so that you can scale where it is in the screen, or you may want draggable windows that can save in certain places. This is just a button, not a window. But okay, so we got our texture U and V. So this is the top left corner of the texture. So there's draw texture and there's draw texture simple. Texture gives us some more options here. We can actually say what part to pull. So you could use this potentially to do sprites or flipbooks. We can tint it. That's kind of cool. We got these modes here. I'm going to switch to opaque. So we want, these are 0 to 1 with their these are UV. That's why they say U and V. They're UVs. You can do some rotation and where to pivot. Some cool stuff there. Okay, so that's going to draw us a texture. But now we also want some text. And let's just make the text say, click me. And we'll just start with make linear color. Don't make the mistake I always make of leaving the alpha 0. Set it to 1 to begin with. We're actually just going to go with a good old white text. I think that'll work. Later we'll do a hover. And it says click me, and we'll pick our font. HUD font's fine. We were at 200, 200, so maybe let's try 210, 210. None of this is going to line up, but it should give us an idea here. So let's hit play. Oh, there's our button. It's a little bigger than I thought. So there's our button. Let's see what size did I punch in there. I punched in 100 for the height. I'll do 50. Okay, but that, we can't click it. It didn't hover when we went over it, so there wasn't really anything interesting there. So let's talk about, let's get this more, give us a little bit more room here. So let's talk about hitboxes. So I'm going to do this wrong first, just to show you, because it's an important concept that probably a lot of people don't get at first. That doesn't initially make sense. So I'm adding a hitbox here on begin play, and I'm going to use these numbers here: 200, 200, 150, 50. So 200, 200, 150, 50. I'm just going to call this button 1, and sure, I'll consume the input. This sets the priority. If you had multiple hitboxes stacked, it'll trigger the highest priority first. Not going to stack anything. I'm just doing this to show you why this doesn't work. So we hit play, and we are going to use, I'm going to hit the tilde key, and we're going to do show debug hitbox. But it didn't show anything. Nothing shown. So here's the reason. These hitboxes only last 1 frame. Yeah, isn't that crazy? You can't just create them and leave them. Remember, everything gets cleared out every frame and redone. That's how the HUD works. That's how games work. So we actually have to move this, and we have to re-add this hitbox every frame. And so now, when we go run the same thing, and we hit our tilde key, show debug hitbox. Look at that. It shows us button 1 here. This is a debug to help you to make sure that your hitboxes line up with your input. Sometimes they don't. And so you can see here it's just telling you whether you're hovered over it or not. We don't have any clicking, or nothing's built off that yet. But we can see that the hitbox works. It lines up. Seems to be good. So we got to draw those every frame. Okay, so if you want a hitbox to go away, you just don't draw it. Okay, so we're going to create this button 1 hovered. I already had it. I've already done this once. I forgot to delete it. So I got this button 1 hovered that's a bool. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, we want to do some, we want to render the text color differently if it's hovered. So we're going to come here, we're going to grab our bool. We're going to use the select, and we're going to say, okay, so this white color is only going to be if it's true, if we are hovered. Otherwise, I'm going to copy that. We're going to have black text. So do 0, 0, 0, still an alpha of 1. Based on this button 1 hovered. Okay, so that's cool. That's cool. We need to set that value now. So we're going to come down here, our hitbox begin cursor over, and we're going to say, is the name of the hitbox that we hovered over equal to button 1? And if it is, then we'll set the hovered to true. Now you may be tempted to say if it's false, we'll set button hovered to not true, which in this case actually kind of works, but not completely. So this event can be called multiple times per frame per each box that it's over. Now in this case, we would probably say that you can't hover over 2 boxes at once, so you'd probably be okay. But it actually won't fire again when you're not over a box. So what would happen here is with just this, even if we had the false, setting it to not hovered, is that as you moved your cursor out of it, it would still stay hovered. What we have to do is use this end cursor over. And use this to set it to not hovered. And while we're at it, let's do get owning player controller. So the HUD is tied to the player controller. It's just kind of an extension of the player controller. Think of the player controller as the input side, which is a little bit fuzzy here because of these hitboxes. But the player controller is more about the input side and the will of the player, and the HUD's about displaying stuff. And though that's a little bit fuzzy just because of these hitboxes. So we're going to do set cursor, set current mouse cursor. So we want it also to let us know that we're hovering over something that we can click on with the hand. And then of course when we're not hovering, we'll set it back to the default arrow. Okay, let's give that a try. So here we are. Look at that. We hovered over it, the bool's getting changed, and because it renders every frame, the next frame after the bool gets changed starts rendering. So this thing's rendering. You know, I'm probably running, I don't know, 80, 90 frames per second here. This thing's rendering 80 or 90 frames per second. You're probably thinking, man, we have to do that every frame. This is like the tick. This is bad, but it's not. It's not. This is how game UI is supposed to work. Rendering it every frame, even if it's super complex, not even going to have a 1 frame per second or even a partial frame per second impact. This is simple stuff. Okay, so let's do a click event here. Go on the click, because there's another problem here that comes up. This one took me a little while to track down. It's been a while since I've worked with the HUD without doing it in C++. And so we're going to just print string. Actually, we don't even need to do that. Just going to print string the button name. So when we click on it, if we're clicking where a button is, it's going to print string the button name. However, as you can see, not working. I'm clicking all different buttons, nothing. So the next question you kind of ask is something else interfering? You know, so we went up here to project settings, and remember we've got input here, and it's tied to, oh look, left mouse button on the primary attack, left mouse button on confirm input. So it's like, oh, okay, you know, maybe it has something to do with that. It doesn't. Those don't consume the input. Also, there's one other thing I noticed that I forgot to remove. So in this project, if you are following along in a copy of the project and it's not working the same way mine is, that is because I went and in this input graph here on begin play, event graph, third person player controller, I went and set the UI mode, set it to UI mode and turned on the cursor here. I just added an extra sequence. Forgot to mention that. But we're actually in the right place here with this third-person controller because in class defaults, remember I said HUD is tied to player controller, enable click events is not turned on. And that is the reason it's not working. So we have to enable click events and then set what click keys we want to send through. So right now this will send left mouse button through. If I want to send middle mouse button or right mouse button, I'd have to hit the add here and add them. Otherwise, the HUD's not going to be able to pick them up. So now that we have that enable click events, and this left mouse button is our event keys, what's going to happen is this will now properly get fired. And there you have it. Client runs client side, saying button 1. So as you can see, it very easily is able to loop through that. One of the things where the HUD really excels rid of this, is on looping through arrays. So let's see if we have some kind of array we can loop through here. We got our owning player controller. Do we have our bag inventory? Ooh, we do. We got our bag inventory item. I don't know if there's anything in it, but we could sit here. And I did not do this before, so we'll see how well this works. But looping through arrays and rendering stuff is one of the things HUD does really well. So we're looping through here and we're grabbing our items. That's cool. Wow, there's a lot of stuff there. So we could... Actually, I think we've got an icon, don't we? Texture to use for icon. Texture icon. I don't know. Let's give it a try. This may not work. So I grab this. And I'm going to grab this texture icon. I don't know if that's going to throw a null reference there or not. And what we would have to do here is we would have to take some starting value and loop. So we're going to say like array index times some spacing number. Let's try 40 maybe. I think there were 32 icons, so give us 8 of spacing. We'll just start right on the X. And we'll just say that each one of these, say they're 32. Let's see what happens. This might not end well, but let's give it a try. I'm not really sure what's in that array. Apparently nothing? Yeah, there's nothing in the array here. Interesting. Yeah. We're going to be replacing all this. We're going to replace that ability bar down there. But anyway, if there were things in that array, we could loop through them and draw textures. So there's some cool stuff you can do there. You will probably have realized by now that this is a much lower level. Obviously, like what we did with this button, we had to do a lot more than we would have to do to create a button in a UMG widget. And so from a blueprint perspective, this gets tedious real quick. Having to do all this low-level stuff, you're going to end up with these ifs and switches forever. However, in C++, this stuff really excels. And so that's where we're going to be doing. We won't be showing the C++, but we'll be using a lot of C++ components to be able to do our UI rendering. I'll give you a quick sneak peek because I think it's in here. We'll see. Draw, enter, render, interactive, inventory grid. It's the inventory system I'm working on. So we have to send it an inventory. OWS inventory. Oh, I thought we had an inventory. Let's go add one real quick. Go over to our third-person character. Bag inventory. Inventory. This isn't 100% working. I'm just going to give you a sneak peek of it. So I think that, let's see here. Library. Oh, the character. That's an inventory item. Those are inventory items. That's an inventory. So I think we have to go here and our event graph. Probably here's okay. create Tory. We'll just give this one 16 slots. Call this bag. And we're going to set the value. OWS inventory. Object reference. OWS inventory. Object reference. Must have clicked the wrong one. But I see a problem here. It's running on authority. I need this local. I'm going to go put it in begin play. Where's begin play? Oh. I meant third person character. It's like, what is wrong here? Third person character with abilities. Ah. There we go. That's more what I was used to. Okay. Inventory. Type OWS inventory. We're on the remote side here. This wouldn't be what we'd actually do, but we only want this for display purposes right now, so we'll do this. And we'll call it bag. We'll do size 16, which will then allow us to go back to our HUD and pull off our bag, inventory. Plug it into here. Let's see, I think it was called Dark Alpha. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we'll just, for now, we'll just stick it at 100, 100. Say the spacing is 10. Width and heights are 32. And we'll do a 4x4. And there you go. You can see there that it renders it. You know, we'll render a nice window underneath it and everything. There's some new tools and stuff that I'll be adding to do a lot of different things, but that's the basic idea. So behind the scenes, this render is looping through. It's taking this bag inventory. We didn't have to make a copy of it. We're just rendering it. If we change anything in that bag inventory, it will automatically change on screen. We can also handle things like drag and drop and lots of fun stuff. But I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a overview of HUD and the things it could do, because I get that question a lot. People are like, oh, HUD, what's that? You know, because a lot of people have only seen UMG, and UMG is more blueprint friendly. But I just, after doing that skill tree thing, I just don't think it's the best solution, at least in our tutorial project, for dynamic data. So for our dynamic data, we're gonna rely on the HUD. So there we go. Again, this project's getting deleted. Don't make any changes to your project. It could mess us up in the future, these changes we've done. So don't do it in your project. If you want to play around with it, you can make a copy of it. But don't make changes in your project yet. We'll be making any HUD related changes again as we move forward. Until next time, see ya.